Good evening, everybody. My name is Susanna Doyle. I'm the Alumni Relations Manager at Trinity Development and Alumni. And good afternoon to everybody in the US who's listening in today. Welcome to this week's Inspiring Ideas at Trinity webinar. We're delighted to welcome Stuart Coulson, a Trinity alumnus and adjunct professor at Stanford's D School, who will be facilitating a discussion with Sarah Stein-Greenberg, also of the D School, and Ken Finnegan, who is the CEO of Trinity's Tangent. They will be speaking about the innovation and the role that their organizations play in creativity and entrepreneurship, which is at the heart of the learning there. Before we start, if you are watching on Zoom, you can enter and exit full screen mode using the top right button on your screen. If you need to adjust your audio settings, you can click on the bottom left button. If you need to leave the webinar this evening, please click on the bottom right button. And if you'd like to ask any questions or send through any comments, please click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and our speakers will do their best to get to all of those questions throughout the webinar. As well, if you're listening in and watching in on YouTube Live, you can adjust your sound with the button there that's circled. You can share the webinar, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, if you have any questions, please put those into the live chat feature and our speakers will do their best to answer as many of those as possible. And you're welcome to send through those questions at any point during the webinar. You don't need to wait until the end. The webinar tonight will go on for about an hour. The speakers will be in discussion for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll open up to the Q&A. And we plan to finish just at about 9 o'clock Irish time or 2 o'clock in California. We are also recording tonight's webinar. So if for any reason you do need to leave early, you will be getting a recording at the end of the webinar in the next couple of days. So now I'd like to introduce Stuart Coulson, who will then be introducing our other guests. Stuart has a long affiliation with Trinity. He holds a BA in computer science, is a member of Trinity's Provost Council, sits on the board of Tangent, and is a founding member of Trinity Angels and the Launchbox Student Startup Incubator Program. He also is an adjunct professor at Stanford University's D School and a lecturer at the Graduate School of Business, where he leads design for extreme affordability. He is an investor in and advisor to early stage technology and social impact organizations in Silicon Valley and Ireland. And he also grows old vine Zinfandel grapes in the Russian River Valley. He co-founded Gradient Solutions, a pioneer in web-based travel e-commerce, which has been acquired since by Sabre. And he has an MBA from the University of Geneva and an EMBA from the Tepper Business School of Carnegie Mellon University. So now let me hand over to Stuart.
Thanks, Susanna. That was a wonderful introduction. I don't recognize that guy, and maybe in a different webinar we can talk about wine and grapes and different things. So thank you everybody for joining us today. I have one of the easiest and most exciting jobs. As Susanna mentioned, I work with both Sarah and Ken, two of honestly global leaders in innovation education. And I am probably the most excited person on the call to hear some of the answers to the questions I'm going to try and give them today. So without further ado, rather than me trying to introduce them, let me talk first to Sarah and ask her perhaps to introduce herself and also tell us a little bit about what Stanford's D School is.
Thanks so much, Stuart. It's great to be here with all of you. And Ken, it's been great getting to know you a little bit. I'm so excited to hear some of the parallels and contrasts that come out of this conversation between our organizations. So I'll just give the shortest possible overview of the D School. We are an institute in the heart of Stanford's campus, and Stanford is fortunate that we have all 7 schools, which includes medicine, humanities and sciences, business, law, education, earth systems. We're all together in one campus. And so we have this incredible opportunity to bring students together from across all of these different disciplines to work together. And the D School got started about 15 years ago by a small group of faculty who were interested in figuring out, well, if we can get all these different kinds of perspectives together and put them to work on really challenging, open-ended, creative problems, how are they going to communicate and collaborate? And the way that we teach the methodology that we teach, which is sometimes called design thinking or human-centered design or just plain design, it becomes this common vocabulary that we use to help orient students to thinking about problems from a human perspective, from a systems perspective, from integrating expertise in engineering and business and pulling all of those different perspectives together. So we have about between 750 and 1,000 students a year on Stanford's campus who will enroll in 1 or 2 elective courses at the D School. And then we also have some robust programs that we orient more towards external audiences, K-12 educators and leaders, people working in the social sector in government or NGOs, other leaders in higher ed, faculty and students from other schools who are interested in what can innovation look on their campuses, and then a program that's specifically for corporate executives. So let me stop there. That's kind of the organizational framework, and then we can talk a little bit more about what we do and what that looks like.
Ken, I'm gonna ask you the same question. There are some differences between the D School and Tangent, but there are a lot of similarities. I don't know if that is something to do with my being in both organizations. I couldn't possibly comment. But your organization has some similar setups, but also does some things a little differently. I wonder, could you introduce yourself and introduce Tangent?
Yeah, so Stuart, it's delighted to be here, and Sarah, lovely meeting you and having this discussion as well. So Tangent is a relatively new organization. We are, our logo, our motto is Trinity's Ideas Workspace. So we are an independent unit from all schools in Trinity, which is similar to, I guess, D School in Stanford. The idea is that we're here for all students, essentially. So we run a number of different programs, and we've our constitution, if you want, we're made up of 3 different streams. And I think it's kind of like, it's interesting to talk about those streams in terms of, it gives you a kind of like a feel and a context for Tangent. So we have an engagement stream, we have an education stream, and we have an entrepreneurship stream. And our engagement stream, it says exactly what it says on the tin. It's about creating an environment, an ecosystem where we can inspire students, where we can demonstrate kind of like the great entrepreneurs, not just from Trinity, but from a national perspective and European perspective as well. Our education stream is what it sounds like. We have undergraduate programs, we have postgraduate programs, we have professional development programs. And again, as I mentioned, similar to D School, we are independent of all schools. So we work with students from across all different disciplines, as well as professionals from across all different sectors, instilling and educating innovation and entrepreneurship within their organizations, and creating that diversity, I guess, for Trinity. And then finally, we have our entrepreneurship stream. And our entrepreneurship stream is all about the incubation and acceleration of those ideas. So students come from anywhere across college. We work with early stage startups, not from Trinity as well, to help incubate. We have design sprints where we can help turn ideas, I guess, into kind of commercial impact, into social impact, into cultural impact, whatever it might be. As I mentioned, Tangent is just 2 years old, essentially, but it's consolidation of all the innovation and entrepreneurial activities from across Trinity for the past 10 years even. Education used to be the Innovation Academy. You obviously are a founder of Launchbox, and that's our entrepreneurial stream. And, you know, it's been, even though we're only 2 years old, it's great bringing a sharp focus of, around innovation and entrepreneurship to Trinity, which is the #1 university in Europe for student entrepreneurship. So we're essentially a front door for innovation and entrepreneurship for Trinity. Yeah, and I think we just moved in. Timing is unfortunate, but we just moved into a brand new building last June. So we were there 8 months exactly. So we're kind of like, timing is half in, half out. But I think actually even our physical location is indicative of who and what we do. We're on the first floor of this brand new building. This building is built on Pearse Street in Dublin in the city centre. And it's the first time a doorway essentially has been put onto Pearse Street into Trinity in 100 years. So the first, coming in through that entrance, it's indicative. It's about connecting industry, connecting real world problems into a 428-year-old research-driven institution. This is kind of like a quick intro to Tangent.
So let me follow up, Ken, with a question straight away. So both of your institutions, and I have to say also the work that I do, suffers a little bit from the fact that universities are built on schools, and schools are relatively independent. But each of your organizations are cross campus. They serve students across the campus. And I'm wondering if you can pick out a few kind of pros and cons of being able to serve that community and work across the university campus.
Well, yeah, look, it's I guess from Tangent's perspective, we, as a new organization, I guess we would look at, I use the word bold in two senses for Tangent. We're bold in terms of the way we teach and bold in terms of what we do, but we also get in trouble sometimes in terms of what we do in Trinity, and sometimes we have to seek forgiveness rather than permission in terms of what we do. I might get in trouble for saying that, but you know, looking at traditional universities, you have the different departments and different schools, etc. Similar to D-School, I guess, is like not being part of any school, and this is by design. Tangent was set up to be there for all students, and I guess a great example of being there for all students. So the Student Accelerator that we run, Launchbox, it's been running for 7 years now, and one of the best, recognized as one of the best student accelerators in Europe. And this year's winner from Launchbox was a group called Promotion, was a company called Promotion, and the students from Promotion were pharmaceutical students. It's a marketing company that they set up, nothing to do with pharmacy. And it just, I guess it shows you that people from all disciplines have lots of great ideas, and maybe they want to try something out in a neutral territory, want to take their idea and turn it into impact, maybe not necessarily in the area that they're studying. These guys came, entered the competition to participate in Launchbox, coming from a pharmaceutical background, obviously have their skills in pharmacy, set up a marketing company and ended up winning the Student Accelerator. So look, we'll always talk about the richness of diversity in thinking, and that's part of what we offer to all students. Everybody has something to offer, everybody has an idea. Tangent offers a space for all students from across all the different disciplines to come in, try out their ideas. It's okay to fail. We encourage failure, but learn from your failure. Have this kind of like growth mindset in terms of let's explore these ideas, what works, what doesn't work, etc.
So Sarah, I wonder, kind of following up on that, you and I struggle sometimes with the cross-campus nature of the D-School and what we do, but we also ask for forgiveness when we get things done and we move things forward. So the setup in the D-School is both a little older, so probably maybe more established, and also slightly different, I think, to Tangent in that you are officially connected to a school, although I'm not sure too many people would know that.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm doing something right if the impression is that we really belong to everyone and not just one school. That's the experience that we want our students to have. And so if that's sort of reflected in the kind of popular notion of what we are, then I think that we're at least in part achieving that. We are technically lodged within the School of Engineering, and that is because of the combination of faculty who happen to be starting it at the beginning. And the nice thing about that is we are within the academic structure rather than in some other co-curricular environment. But as you said, Stuart, I mean, we often have, because we are trying to be so inclusive of students from different disciplines, we're constantly on the hunt for like, ooh, can we borrow a course number from medicine or from, law, or how do we actually make it easier for students who are coming from these connected but still independent schools that have some overlaps in their systems. The latest wrinkle, as we know, this year is like new course schedules due to changes in the overall school year, and all of those things are being unevenly adopted by different schools. And so that there are still, I think, despite the fact that there is so much merit to getting students together to work on these interdisciplinary teams, there are still some institutional challenges because that's not, I mean, this isn't how universities have been designed in the past. As you said, they were designed in in more siloed school-based ways. But I just want to really echo, Ken, what you were talking about in terms of the different perspectives that different disciplinary backgrounds can bring. I think we're just in an era where real innovation lies often at the overlaps and the intersections of different fields. It benefits when you have people who are coming into a situation with really fresh eyes, and they ask a bunch of seemingly naive questions. And also working with them are people who have tons of expertise in those systems or in that environment, and really can then help to navigate and figure out, like, well, okay, here are the conditions under which we could pull different levers to try to make the change now that we have a creative idea for a solution. But I think, fundamentally, we really believe that every human being is creative. And we just don't see that always being encouraged in all different fields and disciplines and organizations. And so, it's an incredible honor when you have a group of students come together who come from their different disciplinary backgrounds, and in the experience of seeing how each other works, start to get some self-awareness about the ways in which their own disciplinary training may have limited their creativity. So, I'll hear law students, for example, have a realization about, like, oh, the training in law is really to prepare you to find, to take risk out of things. And not having a tolerance to risk really blocks you up if you're trying to come up with novel solutions. And so they're starting to gain a fluency in under what conditions might I want to let go of some of these concerns or fears or constraints, and under what conditions do I want to recognize that those are important pieces to solving the problem in a way that can actually get implemented. So it's that incredibly powerful and potent mix that you can bring together when you have people from different perspectives looking at challenges. They just approach them in ways that aren't the conventional ways of approaching those challenges.
So I want to follow up with something that's pretty practical. Ken mentioned that the Tangent managed to move into their dedicated space just in time to move back out because of COVID. And but one of the things as a board member of Tangent that I was very encouraging of was making sure that physically and brand-wise, the space in which these activities occurred were not associated with the school. So even in Ken's case, where it's in the business school building, it's a pretty independent space. You've got a wonderful background, Sarah, right now, which is making me sad because I can't be there, about what parts of the D school look like. And I'm wondering if you could talk for a second about the importance of your physical location.
To me.
Mm-hmm, please.
Yeah, so I mean, we have moved around a lot on campus. So I've had the opportunity to see what happens when we are in different spots. And we, at the very beginning, because this was like a scrappy idea that a few folks had, the only space on campus that was available was like all the way on the edge. It was in an old double wide trailer. It was very rough. And it made it a challenge for some students who were much further away from our location to get there. The advantage was we really took a prototyping attitude toward that early space. And so we were able to experiment a lot. And it didn't feel precious. It didn't feel like we couldn't mess up, right? As the faculty and fellows who were trying to design this new environment. And today, when you walk into our space, it does feel a little bit more resolved. It's easier for everyone to access. You walk into a building that looks very similar to all of the other old style buildings with the beautiful tiled roof. But then when you walk in, you immediately know you're in a different kind of environment. And particularly, it's important for us to design something that feels like it is a neutral territory for the students who are coming from these different disciplinary backgrounds. I think that when, for example, there are classes within other schools where students come from different backgrounds and maybe they sit side by side. But for an engineer going to take a class at the business school, she or he is inside of the business school culture in what that experience is like. And I think that we work very, very hard to put different types of expertise on an equal footing. And some of the ways that the space does that is because it doesn't resemble anyone's home turf. It also gives the students more control over how they might use the space. So, sort of famously, a lot of our furniture is on wheels. You can move it around. You can redesign the space that you're working in. Students who are enrolled in D-School classes have 24-hour access. It's really important that they see themselves as owners and partial designers of the space. And that also unlocks some awareness of how critical space is in affecting your own behavior when you're collaborating and when you're trying to innovate, right? If you're all sitting around looking at laptops when you're trying to generate a lot of ideas, you're going to generate fewer ideas than if you're standing up and you're moving around and there's not one person is holding the whiteboard and controlling the flow of information. So those kinds of physical environments are really designed very specifically with those kinds of behavioral cues and those behavioral changes in mind to help unlock the best of those behaviors in our students.
Great. So I shouldn't say this because I'm going to be breaking some kind of copyright or trademark, but a lot of the furniture in the Tangent floor is also on wheels and movable, which might have something to do with the fact that I spent a couple of hours FaceTiming some furniture designers from Dublin and showing them what was happening in the D School. So very similar environments, which I think is so important to encouraging exactly what you were talking about, Sarah, in terms of both teamwork and kind of innovation and kind of risk taking and freedom. So a lot of cues come from where you're actually doing your work.
I agree with that. Can I just say one more thing, Stuart?
Please.
I think there's also, it can be easy to overestimate. So it's really important, as I think sounds like both of our organizations strongly believe. It's also easy to overestimate the degree to which somehow space then automatically translates into culture and behavior. So the programmatic piece and how the instructors are modeling the behavior and all of that is, I think, is the other piece. And that is one of those pitfalls that I see in some organizations where they will look at a space and then copy some of the surface level attributes and sort of then expect innovation to somehow magically occur. And, you know, we know from getting into it with our students, it's like really about the combination of the space and the behaviors and the people and the expectations.
Yeah, I see the space more as taking away a constraint than necessarily opening up an automatic advantage. But it's very important. I want to move on a little bit and kind of expand our geography. So both of these organizations sit at the center of globally recognized innovation ecosystems. Silicon Valley and Dublin and Ireland are both high-tech centers and centers where a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship occurs. I'm wondering, Ken, maybe go to you first. What is Tangent's relationship with the bigger community, the bigger innovation community?
You're right in terms of like 20 years ago, Dublin was unrecognizable to where it is now. In a previous life, before I joined Trinity, before I became CEO of Tangent, I was the chief technologist in Ireland's Foreign Direct Investment Agency, IDA Ireland. And yes, we are becoming a centre for innovation, if you want. Ireland, Dublin is definitely on the map. I still think there's a bit of a journey for us to go in terms of our evolution, if you want. So, like as I said, 20 years ago, I don't think Google was established, but it's Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook weren't in Ireland. I remember when I was in IDA having a conversation with a British guy once upon a time, and this is back in 2016, and he hadn't been to Ireland since the early noughties. And in the early noughties, he said that Dublin had put call centers, kind of like industrialized call centers, kind of like this is where we started, if you want. Over the past 20 years, definitely there has been an evolution in terms of the capability of these organizations in Ireland. So first of all, getting these organizations to set up in Ireland was the first step. But I think these organizations and the Irish culture and Irish tenacity and ability to kind of like take an idea and make it into something, these organizations has evolved themselves. So what I see at the moment in terms of our engagement with the multinational community, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We are having really interesting conversations with organizations that are evolving their capability in innovation and entrepreneurship. There's a hunger and an appetite from an Irish perspective, definitely, with a lot of the foreign companies, let's say, to evolve themselves into like higher value organizations. And we see that happen. Like Airbnb have senior executives based over here. IBM, really the largest software engineering function outside of the States. And I think one of the only research functions outside of the States is based here in Dublin as well. So you can see kind of like executive decisions and executive power, if you want, here in Ireland. And that's kind of being represented in terms of engagement with universities. And it's not just about a quality education, it's engagement from a research perspective, but also now it's been the development of agile organizations, innovative organizations. And I think there's two conversations and two kind of like interesting areas that we engage with organizations from. Is obviously future ready students, so they want to hire the best students, the kind of like the entrepreneurial mindset, the students that have critical and analytical thinking capability, that are effective communicators, etc. And that's something that we work on in Tangent. But also, if you look at the World Economic Forum, I saw an article from them today. They're talking about the 50% of jobs will be automated by 2025 or some massive number like that. So we're working with organizations as well to with their employees, with lifelong learners. Essentially, it's like we just partnered with a large legal firm recently, for example, and they want to instill that culture of innovation and entrepreneurship within their organization. So Tangent, the skills that we teach our students, they're transferable to organizations and lifelong learners as well. And organizations are see now that these are essential skills for them to be more agile, to be more adaptable, for resilience, etc. So engagement is definitely increasing from a foreign direct investment perspective, but also I think as a country we're evolving as well, and we see that there's a big dependence on foreign direct investment in Ireland, and especially with COVID, I think the numbers for this quarter were down 50% in terms of investment from foreign direct investment agencies. So entrepreneurs are essential in this country as well, and building out the next generation of startups from our institution is essential from an economic perspective as well. So it's genuinely a really interesting ecosystem. So you've got the large multinationals, you've got the thriving startup community, and now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, we see this interaction and how effectively these types of organizations are all working together.
So I'm going to put the same question to Sarah, but I'm going to put a premise in my question, which may be wrong, so she may want to contradict me. In the D School, surprisingly, given that we're sitting right in the center of Silicon Valley, there isn't that much connection to the tech giants and to the tech industry from the D School. We have other connections and different people that we reach out to that are part of our ecosystem. Can you explain and talk a little bit about who those are?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're fairly full of our alums, with some notable examples of some famous kind of startup founders that I don't need to name, but you're absolutely right. We don't have the same kinds of formal partnerships and relationships with some of those companies. And I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. So one is, as we were getting started, which was, in 2004, 2005, 2006, that was really such an important time in the Valley as well. And so in a way, I think we in part kind of grew up alongside the ecosystem, the venture ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, as it was starting to really explode and mature. There had been waves before, but that was a pretty critical time. And I think that at the time, the type of thing that we were teaching was really interesting to companies, to nonprofits. Now, I think there's been so much uptake in the corporate world of things like design thinking, or another, sort of like innovation philosophy coming out of Silicon Valley, lean, right? That you see companies, creating their own versions of that, branding it heavily and investing in it. So, now there's IBM design thinking, and you see an enormous, Google kind of has a sprint methodology that's its version of like, how do you grab a team and help them move really quickly through an innovation challenge. And those things just weren't in existence at the time that we started. I think it'd be really hard to figure out like all of the different directions of influence and impact there, because it was such a chaotic and organic ecosystem in some ways. So in the early days of the D School, we did a lot more partnering directly with companies. And we still do that to some extent, who would help frame interesting innovation challenges for our students. These days, I think I'd have to actually look at the numbers, but there's been a noticeable shift in terms of who comes and seeks us out and asks us for help. And that is more in the social sector. So some of the partnerships that we have in Silicon Valley right now are things, with local foundations or local companies that are looking at more, issues that could certainly be helped by change in the private sector, but also are often framed as social challenges like the digital divide, for example. And even the work that we're doing in Extreme this year, Stuart, I think falls into that, where we're really looking at, where are the places that our students can make an impact right now under the current conditions, given the pandemic. And it's harder for nonprofits and government organizations to afford the same kinds of strategies that are more possible, I think, in the private sector in terms of building your own internal innovation capacity or acquiring a design firm, which has happened all over the place. There has been a huge wave of acquisitions by kind of the major consulting firms and also some big companies of the smaller niche design and innovation consultancies. So that has created, I think, a shift in our ecosystem in terms of who we regularly partner with. I'll stop there. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I'm gonna lead you on to the next part of the question, because you've presented me with a good segue. When I first thought of this next question, I started with what keeps you guys up at night, but I'm gonna change that because that sounds very negative. So what's happening now, or what's happening next? Sarah, maybe you can start with, where's the D School going? You're welcome to include or exclude the pandemic in terms of how far forward you're looking, but what's going to happen next in the D School?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we are really thinking about is the changing mediums in which people are creating. So if we think about the kinds of things that people have used design to build in the past, I mean, in the further distant past, we're really talking about the design of physical objects, right? And then as design has changed to include more innovation opportunities in service design or experience design, certainly in the digital world. But we're seeing a real need for people who work in complicated legacy systems, whether that's government or the education system or the legal system, for example. They're also asking for, how do we apply these same kinds of innovation tools and techniques? But oh, by the way, our context is really different, and the levers for change are different, and the way capital flows is really different. And so that's been a big part of our focus lately, is thinking about design in the context of systems change. So that's one area. That's one kind of new medium, policy and systems. But another kind of new medium has to do with change in technology. So the emergence of things like machine learning or synthetic biology, these are materials and mediums, although they're not as tangible as other mediums, that people are creating new things with and are using to innovate. And we as designers, I think, and people who care about sort of like responsible innovation, I think are starting to use and to be part of work that involves materials that actually they continue to change after you build your product or service and release it to the world because of their very nature. So I think one of the things that we need to do in the design and innovation community is figure out, we're working with a whole new set of materials. How do we get better at prototyping with them and building with them so we can explore that wide range of possible solutions in a way that doesn't unintentionally cause harm? that actually where we're using our ability to imagine new worlds and new futures to think about intended consequences and unintended consequences. And how do we think about the role of our students in these innovation ecosystems, and as innovators, as they start to be able to use these increasingly powerful tools. So I think those two areas are, they're certainly becoming more vivid in our curriculum and in the needs of our partners, and in our classes as well.
So I knew this would be rewarding for me to MC this. Now I know where I've got to go if I'm going to keep my job, right?
That's right. A little more synthetic bio in extreme sportuality.
Yeah, not sure, but we'll try. Ken, I want to put the same question to you. What's the future thinking of Tangent? It's a younger organization, but it has some older roots. And kind of where are you going next? And again, same to you. You can include or exclude the pandemic at your discretion.
No, absolutely. Look, I think, as I mentioned, we are a younger organization, and our core kind of like bread and butter has always been like innovation and entrepreneurship education for undergraduates and postgraduates, right? So it's been, I don't want to say vanilla innovation and entrepreneurship, but it's like that's where we've been focused in terms of our education programs. What we're seeing at the moment, and where I guess Tangent is headed, is it's become a lot more, I guess, a bit more sophistication in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship by itself is fine, and it's a platform that any student from across the university, or those skills that people within organizations want to learn, we have programs that is specifically in innovation and entrepreneurship. But we're starting to see kind of like sectors approach us with kind of innovation and entrepreneurship part of that sector. So for example, earlier this year, we launched for the first time an innovation and entrepreneurship course in creative and cultural entrepreneurship. And we're starting to see a lot more integration of innovation and entrepreneurship across disciplines. So we've got some exciting new programs in the pipeline that I actually can't talk about because we're going through the process in Trinity to get signed off and signed through the academic process. But in the new year, we'll have innovation and entrepreneurship in collaboration with other schools across Trinity. So as I mentioned, we are independent of all schools, but integrating innovation and entrepreneurship is a core kind of like mission of what we want to do. So we will be collaborating with School of Natural Science, School of Medicine going forward as well. So the idea that medical students and environmental students have a core education in innovation and entrepreneurship. Sarah, what you were mentioning earlier on in terms of the space, I think I just wanted to say one thing that I'm really missing about our space is I call myself an energy vampire as well. So that like those, when you have a bunch of students and people in from different backgrounds, when just like your backgrounds there, we've got lots of whiteboards where students come together, they come up with ideas, and I really miss the kind of like you see the tears of frustration when you've got like medical students and engineers and law students trying to come up with a product or service. But I really love when they get to a point where those tears of frustration turn into tears of joy, and happiness is kind of like eventually they are speaking that common language in terms of their own products or services that they're designing. It's what I really miss. But like getting back to the question at hand, yeah, we see innovation and entrepreneurship more specific in different areas, and it's really important, I guess, to call it out as well. So, for example, in creative and cultural entrepreneurship, it's when people talk about entrepreneurship, we tend to think business, right? And sometimes we can alienate other disciplines or people from different sectors. Like, for example, people with a cultural background wouldn't necessarily call themselves entrepreneurs, or wouldn't necessarily be drawn to the term entrepreneurship because it might sound too businessy. So what we do is we bring people that are recognized entrepreneurs that would call themselves entrepreneurs from those disciplines into our courses. And our courses are all very applied, by the way. So they are research informed, but we bring people from the community, if you want, from those industries, those sectors in to teach on our courses as well. And they're able to speak the language of the creative and cultural language, as well as being able to speak the language of innovation and entrepreneurship as well, which makes it more relational to our students. And, you know, it's like, I think having this common language within a sector, actually, we can see our students getting more out of it. So we've got exciting plans for the future. We were kind of like, I guess, I will mention COVID, from a COVID perspective, we were already delivering programs, blended programs. So we were online for some modules, and then some of them were face-to-face. It put Tangent in a really good, or in an okay position in terms of moving everything online. I think we had an advantage over the rest of Trinity in terms of onlining all our different programs. I'm not saying it was an easy job to do, but it wasn't alien to us, let's say. What comes out at the end of this will be really interesting. Right now, our courses, everything is online. Our accelerators, our education programs, etc., are all online. One thing that I find is it's all very transactional. So, and I guess that's the part that I miss about the space, because it's those random meetings where those sparks fly. We're having to produce them and construct them at the moment. Now, there's great tools online that you can do that you can use, like you can have your breakout rooms from your different courses, etc. But it's just not the same. So I think I won't say what we're struggling with, is just like, it's coming to terms and getting to understand the new technologies that can draw the best out of people and out of our students. And it's interesting. We're trialing new technologies, and the feedback has been positive so far, but I guess it's like, it'd be interesting to do kind of like an analysis against like the previous world versus this online world. But yeah, I think I guess those two things are the where I see the future. Sector specific innovation and entrepreneurship, and some type of blended hybrid innovation learning tools that I don't think we've cracked the market yet with those, but I'm looking forward to seeing what tools we'll be using into the future.
So you're both making my job really easy, because the segues are perfect. So we're gonna move over to, and I'm going to segue over to some of the questions that are coming in on the Q&A, and I encourage anybody that's listening in to pop a question in Q&A, and we'll try and get to many as we can. But there has been questions about how students are coping with COVID and whatever else. And so, Ken, you mentioned a couple of things that are happening in Tangent. I wonder, Sarah, just to put a positive spin on it, what is the one thing or two things that you've seen from our conversion to a COVID environment that you think might last or might be contributing to the future of the D School and how it teaches?
Well, I think one thing I'm actually excited about is that because we're now delivering all of our content and learning experiences in a digital format, we're designing, essentially we're designing curriculum that's actually almost ready to share with the public. Whereas normally when we're in the physical classroom, we're inhabiting the space in a different way. We're using a lot of analog props and interactions. And although that's extremely rich and really important to our pedagogy, the benefit of this situation is like, we are so much closer to being able to ship like curriculum that normally people who aren't actually physically at the D School might not be able to access, or wouldn't necessarily be able to access as rapidly. So I'm seeing a real uptick in the production of more shareable tools and techniques. And that's causing a bunch of capacity building to happen within the organization around like, oh, we actually need to do a little more writing and do a little bit more sharing in a different way because our audience is distributed. So that's really positive. I think I'm also just seeing I'm seeing the conditions under which in some ways, innovation really is unlocked, right? So the sort of old saying about necessity being the mother of invention. I mean, we haven't had to face these kinds of constraints before. We're all in it together, both students and faculty. And the rate of learning about new tools, about human interaction, about all of our, emotional reactions and endurance, and all of that, thinking about like, okay, how do you actually teach physical prototyping when we're distributed? We just haven't had to answer those questions before. And so there is a real, just despite how challenging the conditions are, there are going to be some really powerful new ideas that come out of this time from an education perspective. And it's also just normalized a certain level of change and flexibility. And that's one of the most challenging things about working in an educational environment, is that you get very used to delivering things in the same way year after year and following the academic calendar. And that's kind of counter to what you want in a hotbed of innovation, right? Like we need a little more perturbance, I think. So I would never have asked for this type of perturbance. Obviously, the consequences are very broad and very severe. But I am seeing some. I guess I would just say again, like the rate of learning is very high, and so despite all of the challenges, I'm confident that some valuable things are going to come out of this time.
Ken, before we move on, have you got a quick one?
Yeah, no, it's, when the pandemic struck, Tangent, we teach from the ages of 17 all the way up to 70 in terms of the participants on our courses. And we were really worried that we were going to lose a lot of students, because I'd say on our postgraduate courses, a lot of students, probably their average age is in mid 40s, and they have different priorities in life. They have families, they have jobs, etc. So when all this disruption happened at the beginning of the crisis, we prepared for the worst in terms of we expected to see a massive drop off of students from our courses, but actually the opposite happened. The team set up hotlines, we had clinics, everybody on the Tangent team, we have a staff of 20 people became mentors as well. So and you know what, it was really heartening to see, first of all, the team come together and support kind of like our students, but it was like the students, we didn't lose one student because of COVID. So I guess I always talk about kind of like our students having a bigger purpose. If you want to be a student in Tangent 1, it's going to be additional coursework, because especially for undergraduates, but you have to want to be there. And because we're very much applied, people want to set up their own businesses or implement new changes in their organizations or whatever it is. There's a purpose for them being there. It's not just about completing an exam at the end of a module. Actually, we don't have exams. There's a deeper sense of why they're there, and I think that's down to, or why we didn't lose a lot of students was down to because they have that sense of purpose in Tangent as well. So look, it's really, really interesting. As Sarah said, it's been a journey for staff and students, and a shared journey in that as well. And I know that we've taken a lot of strength as well from our students. They've shown us as well as like fortitude and resilience in getting through this pandemic. So it's been mutually beneficial, let's say.
And I think it's even more impressive when students are that resilient, given how, well, for the students on the younger end of the spectrum, like this actually represents like a significant portion of their lives now. And so they're really, they're handling it in many ways with, tremendous resilience. And I just want to echo your point, Ken, about purpose. I think that when you are engaged in trying to solve a broader problem, and particularly when you're engaged in that in a collaborative way, it's fuel. And what we all need right now is some fuel to like keep going. And so I think that type of intellectual and emotional engagement with the work that you're doing, and the ability to then reach, into your own brain and your own, experience, and actually come up with new ideas, the act of creation is actually incredibly meaningful and valuable during conditions like this.
We talk about radical collaboration as well in Tangent at times. It's when you on our education programs, you're never working alone. You're always working in a group as well. And you're working, as I say, on kind of like real world challenges, whether they're corporate challenges or whether they're social issues or whatever it might be. And I think that there is a sense of responsibility to the group when you're working in that team, and you are genuinely solving something that's real for you and real for your team.
So I'll share an energizing moment. Sarah and I were on a call the other night with students that were recruiting for this year's class that I teach. And at one point, one of the students said, "We're really excited to be in this experiment with you." And that that filled up my fuel tank for a couple of months. I'll be able to work on that for ages. It's just wonderful how the students are just taking off with what they're doing and moving forward. It's such, and it shows kind of the kind of things that we're hoping to get out of innovators, which is this ability to deal with the ambiguity and be resilient and roll with the punches and all those good things. So it's just wonderful. I want to try and get to a couple of other quick questions. Sorry, Ken, if we can. So we've got a couple of people who are giving thumbs up to the same question that Clodagh O'Reilly has given us. And the question is, how do we ensure that innovation and creativity becomes inherent in day-to-day business life, rather than you have to go to Tangent / the D School to be innovative and then you go back to your day job?
So can I
go for it? Go for it, Ken.
It's the point that I was going to make, or what I was going to say there a few moments ago. I don't know, guys, if you've ever come across a mathematician from Buffalo called Ruth Noller, and have you ever seen Ruth Noller's equation for creativity? So I really like it. I talk about this quite a lot. So she say creativity is a function of A. I'll explain what A is in a second, but that multiplied by knowledge, evaluation and imagination, right? So knowledge, imagination, and evaluation, these are core to what we do in innovation hubs, if you want. It's like, it's in order to be creative, in order to come up with new ideas, we apply our deep domain expertise. We have to cultivate that imagination, and we have to evaluate what we're doing. But there's a little A that's multiplied by everything, and it's attitude. And Stuart, just what you said, it's like, if you have the right attitude, if you've just students talking about participating in the experiment, if you have a personal attitude about kind of like, you're not the person that says we don't do it that way in this organization. It's culture, it's like, I do really believe that, like, people with the right attitude, it can be infectious. And within organizations, it's like, hey, how about we try, or let's figure out something. Let's work together to come up with a solution. If the attitude is correct, I believe that the culture within an organization can change as well. And it's something, I guess, it's like why and how we partner with organizations as well. So it's about developing that culture, giving them the tools for innovation and creativity. But if their attitude or the culture isn't correct, or it isn't there to start with, you're going nowhere fast. It's kind of a waste of time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's like attitude is the first place to begin.
And I think that certainly in the little work that I've done with businesses and with kind of professional organizations, it's, unless you're coming to it with a thought that this might actually work and it should be supported and we want to try it, it's not going to work. Sarah, I wonder if you have any comments on bringing.
I do. I have. So this is such a wonderful question. We could do another hour. One thing is, I would love to live in a world in which we had some kind of like creativity literacy that was, at the foundation of our education system, right? I think that, we live in a world where challenges are only becoming more complex and more ambiguous, and we have got to think about how are we going to equip young people with the kinds of skills to face and solve problems that we don't even have names for yet. And I do think that for the most part, our educational systems prioritize like learning about how things have been done rather than about how things might be. And that's a really big shift that I'm describing, and it's not going to be fast, but I think it's incredibly important. But then I also think that, within organizations in particular, organizations are collections of individuals. And so I do think the attitude and the mindset matters. And I think it really matters for leaders, right? And one of the things that I think sometimes happens is that leaders will, send a group of people off to a great innovation course at, the D School or at Tangent or somewhere else, and then kind of expect that somehow that skill development is the full picture. But again, speaking about space, like it is about the conditions that you set as a leader within the organization. If you expect different behaviors to come out of your teams, you have to think about, are you truly allowing people to explore riskier ideas? What are the subtle costs or advantages to individuals in their careers if they actually try to introduce new, novel ways of doing things? Do you have an alignment around the vocabulary and the conversation and how you value innovation versus how you value more routine work or more incremental work, which are also important to usually to the long-term survival of an organization? So I think that there's no magic to it. It's really about investing in long-term organizational change to embrace these kinds of skills and behaviors, and the individual mindset is really important, and also the choices that leadership makes as well.
Also, it's like failure is, a lot of organizations are very conservative, and failure is frowned upon and punished. Actually, it's like, I know I've heard anecdotes and stories about people who work in government, for example, who've been great innovators, very entrepreneurial, have saved millions of euros, and they once made a mistake that cost 50,000 euros, and they were punished for their mistake, but not necessarily recognized for everything that they succeeded in. I think developing that culture of it's okay to fail, but learning how to create boundaries so that the failure is not necessarily a cost to the organization, but definitely encouraged and supported.
So we're coming up to the end of the hour. There are a few more questions in the Q&A, and maybe we can get to them by text or whatever later and let people know the answers. But I think that's probably a good place to stop in terms of the answers we just heard from that. There's a great future in what you're both doing, which has nothing to do with the fact that I'm involved in both organizations, but has everything to do with the fact that you two are leading those two organizations. I'm so privileged to be involved in both. And just on a slight COVID note, I would also say I've been involved in quite a few organizations that have had to adapt and to reconstitute themselves in order to be able to work in our current conditions. And you two have just completely knocked it out of the park in terms of being able to keep these very distributed, very creative, very messy organizations going forward in a really productive manner. And I just congratulate you both on what you're doing. Susanna, I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you both, Ken and Sarah, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that's really been so informative. And, even working at Trinity, I've just learned so much in the short time that we've shared together about Tangent. It's been delightful to hear about the D School as well. So thanks so much to Stuart, Sarah, and Ken for your time tonight. I wanted to thank also everybody at Trinity Development and alumni behind the scenes, in particular Siobhan Brady and Amy Brodigan, who have been helping to make this webinar happen tonight. And really, of course, to all of you who have been listening in and watching in tonight, posting your questions. We're sorry if we couldn't get to all of them, but we really appreciate your continued commitment to this webinar series. And we look forward to bringing you back here in the next couple of weeks. If you do have questions about Tangent or would like more information about Tangent or the D School, the URLs are there on the screen. For any questions about the webinar series or any of the other work that we're doing at Trinity Development and Alumni, please email us at alumni@tcd.ie. In 2 weeks, we will be having another webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. It's going to be really interesting. We've got a full lineup of speakers coming across 3 different continents. So really would be great if you're able to be with us again in 2 weeks. That's November 11th at 1 p.m. in Ireland. So thanks again, Stuart, Sarah, and Ken, and to all of you who have been watching. Please stay safe and see you soon. Good night.